Hello Bay Ridge, welcome to another edition of After Hours. Today I wanted to get a little bit practical again this week, and I'm going to talk about understanding and practicing fasting, just possibly giving some tips. On Sunday morning we were looking at the idea of fasting from and feasting on. We talked about the importance of spiritual rhythms, kind of, how Jesus both did periods of fasting but also periods of feasting. Being with the crowd but withdrawing from the crowd. And we talked a little bit about how fasting includes both food but also other activities. And I want to talk, but I really want to mainly focus on the fasting from food and just giving a few tips, because it's not something that many of us have done a lot in our culture. I'm again not an expert at this, but I have fasted quite a bit through the years, so I'll give just a few tips on how you could begin to the spiritual discipline of fasting. First off, I want to give 4 good reasons. Why should I even practice fasting? What's the purpose? Why would I want to skip food? How does that really help me grow in my relationship with Jesus? Well, number 1 is because it's taught and encouraged in the scripture, both by Jesus' example. For example, in Matthew 4, where he fasts, and in Luke, when it records about the fasting, it says that he even comes out of that full of the Spirit and power as he comes back. But Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew 6, if you look, Jesus doesn't say if you fast, he says when you fast. He assumes that his followers are going to practice fasting. So it is taught in the scripture. Number 2, it's been the constant practice of great Christians that we look at through the ages. When we think of believers who really made an impact, the early church fathers up through Chrysostom and St. Augustine, and in more modern times, Calvin and Luther and guys like Jonathan Edwards and John Wesley, they actually practiced fasting regularly. It was part of their rhythm and ritual. And we should not quickly discount that. We should learn from those who we are excited to see the effect that their lives had. We should be asking ourselves, what rhythm and practice did they have? It was carried on by the leaders in the church in the scripture, and it's been so all the way down through church history. Thirdly, even though we think of fasting, we say, well, why would it matter whether I eat food or not? That's because in our age, we have disconnected the body from the soul. But the biblical picture is that the body and the soul are intimately connected with one another. They can be distinguished, but they can't be divided. So that what I'm doing with my body does affect my spiritual life. And what I'm doing with spiritual practice does have an effect on my body. The two go hand in hand. So the practice of fasting, which is a physical exercise, but it can have great spiritual benefits because the body and the soul are actually linked with one another. That's why, again, Jesus said when you have the physical hunger, it's to remind me of a spiritual hunger. This link together really labors and works. And so the practice of doing physical things can affect my spiritual health and posture. That's a big principle to pay attention to. And then the 4th one is it is also just important, because our body and our soul are linked, it's important that we sometimes practice saying no to physical desires. Not just things that are wicked or sinful, but actually just regular physical desires. The Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 9, verses 24 to 27, he says, don't you understand and know that not everybody who competes in the games wins the prize? That's why athletes go into strict training, because they're competing in such a way that they want to get the prize. And Paul likens that to us. And he says, look, this is why I beat my body, is his phrase, and I make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself won't be disqualified for the prize. Now, Paul was not into just doing things to harm his body or do things, but he's saying, I engage in practices like fasting. I engage in rigorous physical discipline, but I'm doing it to win the eternal prize. I'm doing it for spiritual reasons. And Paul says there is a benefit to disciplining our body, as it were. And so for those 4 reasons, it's taught and encouraged in Scripture. It's been the consistent practice of God's great saints down through the ages, the great paragons of the Christian life down through the ages, the link between our body and soul, and the importance of sometimes just saying no to a bodily desire to discipline ourselves. For all of these reasons, fasting is a good practice. So if I'm going to do that, then how do I actually practice it? Let me give just a few tips. Number 1, start small, especially if you've never done this much before. Don't try a long fast if you're not experienced. And I would even include, if you haven't really done this, don't even try a day-long fast. Perhaps just skip 1 or 2 meals to begin with, especially at the beginning. Allow other water and liquids. Just say, I'm just not going to eat any solid food. Try to do that 1 day each week. And then maybe as we move through these next 7 weeks, you can increase the length. So maybe this week coming up, you just fast for 1 meal and you allow yourself coffee or juice or other things. And then, you do that maybe for a couple of weeks, and then try a couple of meals, and maybe even try 1 day where I do a couple meals and I only allow myself water. And then you might be able to gradually increase it as we move through these next 7 weeks. And that's how I begin. Begin small and then kind of grow. Also important to remember, if you're going to be fasting, be careful with your other exercises and activities. If you have really physical labor, then maybe you're going to have to pick other ways to fast or days when you're not working. I work out. I try to do it 6 days a week, but if I'm going to be fasting, that's a day where I have to cut back on my workout because I can't simply do all of that physical strain and then not have food to rebuild my muscles in my body. So it's going to have an effect on your other rhythms. Be aware of that. Be aware as you do this, you may get headaches, especially if you're not drinking coffee or having things with caffeine or things with sugar. Your body can react. That actually can be a little bit of a sign that maybe we needed to take a break and do this. But there may be some withdrawals from doing that, and that's okay. It's a reminder to us of how desperately we need God and for us to cry out to Him. You also may find, if you've never done fasting before, you may feel colder when you do it. I remember when Linda and I fasted a lot on Okinawa, we were amazed at how cold we could feel, even though that was a tropical climate. Particularly, in the winter time, you can just feel much, much colder. So that may be a day, if you're having liquids, drink some hot liquids to kind of warm you up. But with all of these things, when you're experiencing things like that, let the physical sensations, whether it is hunger pains or even a headache or maybe it's being cold, let it orient you towards God. Let it remind you that your deepest need is not even warmth, it's not freedom from pain, it's not even your daily bread, it is God. That is our deepest need. And so let it orient us towards that, and it's a great time to remind ourselves and turn to God. Quote some scripture, spend some time in prayer. Let it be a time that we are fasting on. Don't just try to work through it. Don't just, I'm just skipping a meal and this gives me an extra half an hour to work. No, use it to feast on, to draw close to God. I want to encourage us in these next period of weeks. Let's grow in some of these ancient spiritual practices so that we can grow strong. We can flex our spiritual muscles. We can let it renew and strengthen us as we move through this time. And then we can come out of a period of fasting to a real celebration as we come into Easter and an entire season of feasting that will follow. I hope the Lord will be guiding you. Continue to seek Him and think through what those things are. If you even need some tips or whatever and you say, I'm not sure what to do, don't hesitate to reach out to me by phone call or text. I'd be glad to talk with you about it, for us to take this time to fast from so that we can feast on. I hope you have a great week. I look forward to us gathering again for worship this coming Sunday. Bring a friend, come early, stay late, and enjoy the presence of God with His people. God bless.